for attending today's talk. So my name is Daniel Packwood. I've given a very generic title. I'm actually talking about something different than what's in the abstract, but I think the talk's more appropriate for this audience.
Just a second.
Oh,
yeah.
We've got more people. Okay. Okay, I'll introduce our research institute just briefly. So at the moment, we're in an institute called ICEMDI. I belong to ICEMDI. It's actually part of the same sort of network of institutes. These were a bunch of institutes with WPIs, World Premier Initiatives, I think they're called. Started in about 2007. ICEMDI was one of them. ICEMDI is another. They're meant to be something like the Max Planck Institutes in Germany. They're supposed to be places where we can focus on our research. So this is a photograph of ICEMDI from shortly before COVID. We've all grown up a little bit since then. We're mostly researchers. There's very few students here at ICEMDI, but we do have a few. Our focus is between molecules and cells. We're interested in things bigger than molecules, things smaller than cells. We call this the border between materials and life. Things like supramolecular materials, things related to cell membranes, all kinds of things like that. And we work very much in an interdisciplinary manner. Hopefully in the future, when we have another CEMDI Symposium, we can have it at Kyoto. So I look forward to hosting you there. So my research group, I'm the PI of a theoretical research group. We sit somewhere between computational chemistry and mathematical science. I use this word very broadly. What it means is we take techniques like machine learning, statistics, probability, stochastic processes. We combine them with things like quantum mechanics, molecular dynamics. We study a whole lot of things which are of interest to our experimental collaborators. Self-assembly, semiconductors. We've done a lot of porous materials like Professor Wu talked about just now. Last year I talked about those. I also talked about biofunctional single molecules. We do a little bit of econophysics just to keep things fresh. Today I'm going to talk about our work in semiconductor data science. And the reason why is that this work started as a collaboration. There is a collaboration between Japan and New Zealand. New Zealand is my home country, in case you're curious. The reason I want to talk about it is it may give you some ideas for nurturing collaboration between Japan and Canada. So just a little bit of a backstory. I used to do a lot of work, not at the moment so much, but I used to do a lot of work trying to simulate molecular self-assembly on surfaces. And what we did to achieve that is we created a machine-learned intermolecular pair potential. Okay, so a potential which can predict the energies of pairs of molecules on the surface. So you do some Monte Carlo with that potential and you can predict how the molecules line up on the surface. All very good stuff. I thought that was really cool. Not many people were that interested in the surfaces. They were very much interested in the machine learning. It turned out that their whole strategy was interesting for researchers from a completely different field. So a couple of years ago, right at the peak, well, not the peak of COVID, but close to the peak, we had an online workshop with some potential collaborators from the McDiarmid Institute in New Zealand. So this is it's kind of a consortium of material science nanotech researchers in New Zealand. There's not many people in New Zealand, so what they do is they make this virtual consortium where people from the different universities can participate in this. They can share resources, they can share equipment and so on. We had an online meeting, it went really well. There's a lot of interest from both sides. And I got talking to a Professor Justin Hodgkiss. He's an expert in ultra-fast spectroscopy and also simulations related to the materials he studies. He's particularly interested in organic solar cells and exciton diffusion. So here's a photograph of an organic solar cell. What it does, it absorbs sunlight, and after absorbing sunlight, it generates an electric current. Okay, that's what an organic solar cell is. If you zoomed up and looked inside, this is what you would see. So you've got two key components. You've got an acceptor layer and a donor layer. The acceptor layer is an organic semiconductor. That just means it's a crystal or it's an amorphous solid of organic molecules. These are the black things here. So sunlight hits one of these molecules. It generates an exciton, a special kind of exciton called a Frankel exciton. Those are electron hole pairs, which are tightly bound together by the Coulomb attraction. And those excitons hop between different molecules. They make their way to this thing here called the donor-acceptor interface, where they dissociate into electrons and holes. And when they do that, that creates an electric current. The problem is, if the exciton diffuses too slowly, you've got a very strong attraction between the electron and the hole. So there's a danger that the exciton is going to recombine. The electron hole will recombine, the exciton will die. So if the exciton is too slow, it will die. But if it gets there nice and quickly, it's going to split apart and create that electric current that you want. So the figure of merit for these systems is the exciton diffusion coefficient, which ranges from about 0.01 for slow cases to about 0.1 for fast cases. We want to find materials which really optimize that diffusion coefficient. Now, the way in which this can be simulated is a technique called kinetic Monte Carlo. This was very much, I wouldn't say it was developed in Justin's group, but it was very much perfected for the case of organic solar cells. It's a simple model in which you treat your exciton like a random walker, and it hops over the molecules inside of the organic semiconductor. So that's actually a very big approximation physically, but it works out relatively well. The rate at which the exciton hops is given by this Marcus expression here. Okay, it looks very complicated. It's full of parameters. This is just a constant A. This one I'll talk about a lot today. This V, it's called the coupling. I'll define that soon. You've got some other parameters related to the energies of the molecules and the energy of transferring the exciton, things like the reorganization energy and the energy difference. I'll come back to these soon. But if you know this constant, this rate constant, you can simulate the diffusion of the exciton through the organic semiconductor. And then you can repeat the simulation many, many times, average over the results, get the mean square displacement, divide by T, and that comes out as your estimate of the diffusion coefficient. It works out relatively well. So here are some spectroscopy, some measurements of the diffusion coefficient from spectroscopy on some crystalline materials. You can just ignore these two. I know the co-authors of this paper, they've been very careful. They put these 2 points up here. These are actually different crystal phases than was simulated experimentally. You can see overall there's a pretty good comparison between the experimental diffusion coefficient and the diffusion coefficients obtained by kinetic Monte Carlo. So that means you can use this method as a way to do perhaps some screening of materials for organic solar cells. So would it be possible to do high throughput kinetic Monte Carlo simulations to discover new organic semiconductor materials? So this is the vision that Justin Hodgkiss's group has. High throughput kinetic Monte Carlo question mark. You've got some candidate organic semiconductors, different molecules, different crystals. You run kinetic Monte Carlo for each one, and you keep the ones that are predicted to have a high diffusion coefficient. That's what we want to achieve. It looks feasible. This is actually very easy to do. You can simulate it very quickly on a laptop computer. You can parallelize it even more. You can parallelize it as well to make the simulations even faster. It's not hard to do. Or is it? No, it's actually very hard to do. There's a massive computational overhead to kinetic Monte Carlo. I told you just before, you need to know this rate constant. It's full of these horrible parameters that you have to calculate from first principles before the simulation can start. And really awful first principle calculations, things involving excited states, time-dependent DFT, coupling reorganization energy differences. So to reduce that overhead, we need very quick ways to estimate these parameters without having to do those horrible first principles calculations. Is that a job for machine learning? So that's where our collaboration started. They saw what we had done with the self-assembly study, and they thought, well, maybe we can work together and do something about calculating these parameters. So I had a postdoc working with me, Dr. Tian. She now works in a bank. She's making much more money than what I make. And we collaborated with these guys here on the right-hand side. So they brought the spectroscopy and the excited state quantum chemistry expertise. We had the data science expertise. Okay, so I talked about this parameter Vij, exciton coupling. So I want to talk about these in more detail now. So look at the scenario here. We've got an amorphous organic semiconductor here. We've got some pentacene molecules. They're packed in an amorphous configuration. We've got our exciton, and it's hopping over these molecules. The coupling parameter is defined quantum mechanically like so. I'm sorry, I can't give you a more intuitive picture than this. Quantum mechanics is always mathematical. Okay, I've come to that conclusion through my short career. Can't make it any more intuitive than what it is. You've got one state here, which corresponds to this study. You've got a dimer, you've got a pair of pentacene molecules. And we've got 2 wave functions here, 2 states. One state is where the exciton is localized on molecule I, and molecule J has nothing on it. And the other state is where the exciton is located on molecule J and not on molecule I. Here we have the electron-electron interaction operator. Okay, so you can think of that as a perturbation from perturbation theory. What's happening is that this electron-electron interaction is driving the exciton transfer from this molecule to that one here. That's the quantum mechanical picture. If You can calculate this, as I said, from a technique called time-dependent density functional theory. It's very, very slow. On a really good computer, it's going to take you about 7 hours just for one pentacene diamond. Very slow. It's not super slow, but it's too slow for a high throughput kinetic Monte Carlo. If you've got an amorphous material like this pentacene, you're going to have to calculate thousands of different couplings before you can even start thinking about kinetic Monte Carlo. You've got this massive time barrier, this massive overhead of computation to think about before you can start your kinetic Monte Carlo simulation. So can we replace this time-dependent DFT calculation to get this in here with a machine learned model? So we just took our model that we made for the self-assembly study, and we just imported it directly into this one here. This is what the model looks like. Firstly, I want to point out my thanks to Dr. Cunningham from Dicel. He actually created this amorphous pentacene structure here with his MD simulation. So this is our machine learning scheme for predicting exciton couplings. We have a dimer. We have some Coulomb matrix type descriptors. We sort them. We do some print PCA to reduce the dimensionality. We then have a support vector machine just to classify these things as being weak or strong. And then we have two different Gaussian process regression models for making the predictions on either the strong case alone or the weak case alone. Now we just have the split scheme. We find that tends to work better than having one scheme alone. Here's the performance on, well, over 4,000 dimers. This is the amount of training data we had for each component. It works pretty well. We struggle to get really strong R-squared values like you see when you're doing predictions for ground state energies and so on. We just haven't managed to get much better results in this, but this seems to be pretty much in line with what other people from other papers have achieved. Not only that, but the split scheme has an advantage. It can reduce the amount of training time you need. So you can train this within about 19 hours compared to 76 hours if we just go compared to one Gaussian process regression. And of course, this is obvious, the prediction time is extremely quick. You're talking about tens of milliseconds or 10 millisecond difference. Okay, so we made this model to predict our couplings. Can we put this into our kinetic Monte Carlo? Well, that's what we did. So we put those parameters into the kinetic Monte Carlo. We then ran our simulation. This is probably the key one to look at. This is the mean square displacement of our exciton from the initial position. The oranges with the machine learned couplings, the blue line is the reference density functional theory. It's pretty good except for at large times. And here are just some cross sections of the probability distribution of the exciton at different points in time. It looks basically the same to me. It's not exactly the same. If you go ahead and calculate the diffusion coefficient, you'll see that the model predicted one tends to be a little bit smaller. It's not bad. It's not bad. You can also get the diffusion tensor eigenvalue. So this gives you the symmetry, how symmetric this cloud of excitons is. And we see comparable results here to what we had before. You can see it's also getting the asymmetry, relatively speaking, of the exciton cloud that you can see here. So very good. It's a good start. We have succeeded to machine learn those excitonic couplings, but a very serious problem remains at this point. Our coupling model is restricted to only one kind of molecule. We trained it on pentacene data. It applies to pentacene. That's all. We can't use it for virtual screening. So I'll come back to how we solved that problem first. But let's just have an interlude. Okay, because we're all gathered here today, and I'm sure this conversation is going to come up at some point. How do we fund this endeavor between Japan and Canada? Well, we've done it already between Japan and New Zealand. There is a program that you guys can actually apply for right now called the JSPS Bilateral Program. It's really good. There's two flavors, joint research projects or seminars. We got the research projects one. What will happen is if you get this, JSPS will give you 5 million yen for 2 years to the Japan team. And the Canada side, the Canadian Funding Agency will provide a matching fund for the Canadian researchers. So you can use that to support the Canadian side and also the Japan side, and you can send each other to each other's countries using this scheme here. So here are two workshops we held using that scheme a couple of years ago and one last year. And you can also see we supported dispatch of young Kyoto researchers, and we received young researchers from New Zealand to stay at ICEMS for a couple of weeks. So it's a really good scheme. I've just submitted the report now. There's not too much reporting to do on the Japan side, thankfully. I don't know what the Canadian Funding Agency requires. I'm seeing some funny looks. And there's another one, this is quite famous, probably people know it already. It's a JSPS postdoctoral fellowship. So this is a fellowship that's available for excellent young scientists who are wanting to do postdocs in Japan. It pays a good salary, a stipend, a stipend for the person's research, and also research budgets attached to them. And through that, we actually got a young scientist, Jeff Well, from New Zealand. He enjoyed the previous collaboration so much, he came to join my group. And now I'll talk about Jeff's contribution to this project. And a general exciton coupling model. So what did we do here? We want to move towards a coupling model that works for all kinds of molecules, not just restricted to pentacene. So this is our coupling expression here. If you go into the golden ages of quantum chemistry, if you look at the old papers from the 1950s, you'll find this beautiful approximation that was published by Longfritz Higgins in 1956. He showed that this integral, this horrible thing, can be approximated as a beautiful sum over simple Coulomb-like terms. Looks very much like a Coulomb type expression. It's not quite. These Q alphas, Q betas, these are called atomic transition charges. It's a little bit hard to describe. It's the matrix element. It's a matrix element of the charge density operator for the molecule in isolation. This is the ground state of molecule ion isolation. This is the first excited state. You see, it's kind of projecting the electron density of the ground state onto the excited state. It's not quite a ground state charge like you're familiar with, like was in Professor Wu's talk just before. It's something half between there and halfway towards an excited state version of a charge. But we can think of it as something like a charge when we're doing our calculations. So this is known as the ATC approximation. It's been used a few times, but it hasn't really been put through its paces. It hasn't been tested extensively. So we put it to work. So we grabbed 1,989 organic crystals from the Cambridge Crystal Data Center, and we sucked out the dimers from those. And we calculated the exciton coupling using the ATC approximation. That's this axis. We compared it to ones that you obtained just by doing direct integration, by directly calculating that integral I showed you before. It looks pretty good to me. It's not perfect. If you really stare at it hard and long, you can see there's some little issues up here. That's because for very strong couplings, the ATC approximation is neglecting some very close range quantum effects, but they're obviously not so important because they don't seem to make much of a contribution here. So we can live with that. So the idea here, instead of creating a machine learned model for the couplings directly, let's make a machine learned model for the atomic transition charges. And if you have such a model, then you can compute this Vij for any type of molecule just by putting these Qs into this approximation here, into that formula. So how do we do that? We use a graph neural network. So these are really popular for predicting, these are becoming popular for predicting atomic properties of molecules. So I'll just take you through it conceptually. It's a really awful model, actually. It's really complicated. You've got your molecule structure here. On each of the nodes being the atoms, you've got some atomic feature vector. On each of the bonds, you've got some edge feature vector. And then it goes through this really strange iterative embedding procedure. So on each step, you've got capital M different vectors, feature vectors assigned to these nodes here. So M vectors per atom. And what's happening during this iterative procedure is information from the neighboring atoms is being harnessed to update the feature vector on the atom of interest at each step. So this is how you're learning the environmental information around the atom, how you're embedding it into your prediction. So you do that L times, capital L times, you average over the M vectors and you get your final atom features appearing on your molecule here. There's then a couple of additional steps, and from that you can get your atomic transitions charge predictions. I should point out each of these big arrows is one neural network or one nonlinear transformation. So there's a whole bunch of parameters leading you from here to here to here to here. It's a very messy model. But this is the key idea, this idea of harnessing surrounding environmental information to get your predictions on your atom. Just in case you're curious, the initial features we chose to use are something called SOAP, quite famous in the machine learning literature now. Smooth overlap of atomic positions. I can talk about why we did that later. We also included an integer value feature corresponding to the hybridization state of the atom. We found that by including that feature, we just got slightly improved performance. We also have an integer value feature for the bond type, so single, double, triple, and so on. We have a very simple feature for this. The actual method and architecture we took from this paper here. We don't know these researchers. They're a group from Samsung in Korea, the other country, the other place that started with K. But if you want to know the details, really, I encourage you to look at that paper because our paper is still under review. So this is what we get after training the model extensively. A similar R-square value to before. These are the ATC predictions, by the way. A lot of atoms have gone into training it, but actually from a relatively small number of molecules. You see that there's a larger error at smaller values of ATCs here, and this is a close-up of this region here. If you look at that, it seems relatively along that straight line. It's not perfect, but it's okay. Here's some predicted coupling. So we've taken these predicted ATC values, we've put them into the atomic transition charge method approximation here. And we've applied them to some really important organic photovoltaic materials. These are called FREERs, fused ring electron acceptors. So these are really very much benchmark materials for organic solar cells. You can see the coupling agrees pretty well with the ones obtained using DFT calculated ATCs. This is just showing you again the accuracy of our ATCs with the graph neural network versus DFT for these different molecules. It seems pretty, I can't see any differences in those blocks. So we achieve reasonable accuracy when predicting ATCs, and we also achieve generality. We can predict couplings of good accuracy for a range of very complex molecules. That's the key message here. How general is it? Well, let's be honest. There are some problems with this method. I don't want to be dishonest here. There's an error propagation which limits the accuracy for weakly coupled cases. So we've got these cases here. These are all cases where the coupling is very strong. But if you apply it over a massive database, you see overall, you get a nice linear trend, but there's this weird vertical line that appears around about 0. That's actually, you can kind of explain that, or somewhat explain it. If you define the error of the prediction like so the difference between the DFT ATC and the graph neural network ATC, then two error terms will appear in your predicted coupling value. Here I've just colored the points according to those error terms. So for some reason, you get really large first order and second order errors appearing when the coupling is in fact weak, less than about 75 MeV. And you can see a case here where the ATC values are not predicted very well at all. So the graph neural network seems pretty good for predicting strongly coupled cases, but doesn't seem to be very good for predicting these ones where the coupling is very weak. We get very large first and second order errors appearing there. We don't quite understand why. We're trying to figure that out. But I just wanted to put this up here, just to show the full breadth of our results. Okay, now back to the kinetic Monte Carlo simulations. So now we put our graph neural network predicted couplings into here, and we run our kinetic Monte Carlo. You can see we get some pretty good predictions of the diffusion coefficient compared to ones from DFT. So clearly we can use this graph neural network as a way to accelerate the prediction of this Marcus hopping rate for these KMT simulations. So very good. So good predictions, a step closer to enabling virtual screening based on kinetic Monte Carlo. We're not quite there yet though. There's still some other horrible parameters, particularly this reorganization energy, that we still have to find a way to quickly calculate. That's the energy that accompanies the change in the conformation of the molecule as the exciton shifts from one to the other. So we've still got work to do, but at least you can see we've created a strategy for moving forward. Okay, so what's next? I'll just briefly mention this. Our collaboration continues. We've just started a new project called eAsia. I don't know if this is so relevant to this particular audience. This particular funding scheme is to support research collaborations in the Asia Pacific. There might be something comparable with North America, so please check it out. It's quite a good scheme. There's a lot of money put in from all three sides. We'll be collaborating with a researcher from Thailand, a friend of mine. We're going to be looking at the interface between the whole transport layer and this the organic semiconductor region. So stay tuned for results. So just some final take-home messages. These are a little bit cringe, but I want to put them up because I think they're quite useful. To have a successful collaboration, you need complementary needs. We were looking for a new research direction. They really wanted to incorporate data science in their work, and they had a very clear direction for doing so. So it was an immediate catalyst for performing a collaboration. We started with a small-scale project. Our initial coupling model, that one for the amorphous tendency, we just took an off-the-shelf architecture that we'd already developed. It's a very easy collaboration to do. It just happened to work. And then we moved to a much bigger project with a much larger scope, and that was with the graph neural network. This is really important. I think the reason the collaborations worked well is because we got funds in proportion to the maturity of the collaboration. We didn't try to get really big funds right from the start. I've been involved in a few situations like that. It's not good because you don't know the other people, and suddenly you've got to suddenly produce this really amazing result with a really big fund that you've got. I don't recommend that. So I think it'd be good for you guys just to find some small funds to get started with and then work your way up from there. Okay, thank you very much. Just really acknowledge my research team, particularly Tanya, who did the work on the appendices, and Jeff, who did the work on the vacuum network. Thank you very much.
So I think we've been running a bit late. I would suggest that we have a discussion during the lunch break, and maybe we can resume the afternoon session around 1:10 or 10:01. Yeah. So I would like to make an announcement.
So for lunch, we have student canteens, right?
Yes.
And there are some halal restaurants as well, if you're vegetarian.